No role plays, no conference calls, no BS. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader. This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And Lorenzo, on this episode, I want to talk about an article that I saw on LinkedIn. It was put out by the Deloitte company, and the article is titled 6 Leader/Worker Disconnects Affecting Workplace Well-Being. And I don't specifically want to talk about well-being, but more along the lines of the fact that there are disconnects between leaders and workers pretty much across the board. Like there are disconnects that occur between the people implementing strategy and policy and the people executing strategy and policy. And sometimes or oftentimes that can lead to a lowering of employee satisfaction, a lowering of employee engagement, performance, a raising of turnover and attrition. There's a lot of things that occur when leaders and employees are disconnected from each other, really when it comes to any policy, and this article specifically around well-being.
Yeah, I don't think necessarily the disconnect is like a new thing. I think that happens and it continues to happen when it comes to certain things. But what is very interesting about this now is that you have a lot of organizations and leaders of organizations that are looking to improve some of the things around workplace well-being. Like there's a lot of effort and time and an investment being done to make it better. So anytime that you're really looking to influence something like that and to be able to make it better for your organization, then this this gap or this disconnect is extremely important, even more so because you're looking to implement new things and you're looking to see are these things having an impact?
Right. So before something becomes important, there's less likely to be data on it because if either A, it's not being focused on to begin with, or B, no one wants to lift up the rug to see the roaches unless they have a way to kill the roaches. So, so before that happens, you're not going to see a lot of this stuff. If you're seeing information around disconnects between leaders and workers affecting well-being, it means that by definition, leaders are saying, hey, this is important. We want to make these changes. We want to get better at this. And this is calling, kind of bringing to the surface the gaps that do exist. So, it's one of those things where it's like the first step to solving a problem is admitting you have one. A lot of these articles refer to that. It's kind of, it's a good thing that they exist. It's a good thing that you know about the disconnect. It's not good that it exists, but you got to start somewhere and kind of figuring out why it exists to begin with. It has to be done before you can take steps to solve it. I think a lot of this comes from the way in which some of these surveys are taken into account, like how the data is gathered. Right? If someone came to me and said, I need you to positively impact this metric when it comes to anything, employee engagement, performance, anything, and I put together a strategy to impact it or to improve it, and it wasn't something that was very easily measurable from any way except for surveying people, then naturally I'm not going to say it's not going well. If you come to me 6 months later and say, how did this go? I'm going to say, yeah, it went great. It went absolutely great. Because what's the alternative, right? Is for me to say, no, it didn't go well. I didn't do my job, right? That no one's going to say that. So the perception between the two can be off simply because of how the data is gathered. But that doesn't mean that it is necessarily only due to that. Like there are real disconnects between leaders and employees that span beyond just how the survey data is collected.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think that there's, to your point, like the bias will kick in if you survey anybody who's been a part of making a strategy.
Right.
It does happen, but it is very rare that somebody would say, like, not only was I responsible for this, but then I also failed to do it well, if you're going to survey me. So I agree with you on that. I do think, though, there's value in elements of self-reflection and asking about it. But I think that the questioning has to be different. Like, as an example, if you're going to talk about something like, physical well-being at work, if there's going to be a question for the employee base, that should be a question around, the change, the most recent change, or since this last survey or since this time period, has this been something that has been improved? And then the question that would be for the C-suite or those that built the strategy would be something around like, based upon the insight gathered, or based upon the feedback that you've gotten from your workforce, how do you believe this has been, how do you believe this has been taken, or how has this been received by the team?
Right.
Kind of good, positive, negative, neutral, something like that, where it's like you're getting the information, but you're asking two different questions. I think a lot of times these types of surveys, it's asking the same questions of two different audiences, which can cause there to be even larger gaps.
No, that I think that's spot on. And one part of the audience is responsible for the success of whatever the data is, and the other part of the audience is the one who has to live with whatever those programs or benefits are. So there's an inherent bias there. I think when it comes to the perceptions between employees and leaders, the reason why some of that gap is there is because employees largely want to feel like they're in the same boat as their leaders. Meaning, you often see announcements of layoffs in the tech sector, right? And if those layoffs are followed up with 3 months later by an expose saying that the leadership of that same company all got record bonuses that year for making sure that the profits of the organization were amazing, and they got that way by cutting 30% of the labor, that doesn't go over very well. But if you have to cut jobs from your company, which is a necessary thing, sometimes it is what it is. If that goes alongside the leadership saying, "Hey, we're taking a 20% pay cut and we're not doing bonuses this year because by doing that we're able to cut down on the amount of layoffs that we had," that goes over better. It's not that people feel like the company has an inherent responsibility to keep everybody hired regardless of how the company's doing. It's that they want to feel like that if the company's doing well, that the spoils are spread out amongst everybody. And if the company's not doing well, that the pain is spread out amongst everybody, even though there are different responsibilities in the organization and different expectations about what that job looks like. So if a company does that well, I think the alignment between the two becomes a lot better, because people just inherently feel like, hey, we're all kind of in this together, even though we have different expectations.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that you're right. Like, there's an element of, from a perception gap standpoint, like is the perception that, we move as an organization and that we do the best that we can to take care of one another and make really tough decisions in a way that's, as fair and equitable as possible? Or is the perception that there are decisions that are being made at the expense and cost of those that work there, while, other people get, benefits and continue to get bonuses based upon those types of decisions? So I think that perception piece is big. I think when you look at this article specifically and look at like physical well-being, mental well-being, financial well-being, social well-being, which is kind of how they broke it down, what kind of showed me a little bit of like, there's big gaps here is the amount of the C-suite leaders who feel like all of these things have improved by big, huge amounts, where the vast majority of the employee surveys are in the space of either no change or slightly worsened, with no change being the biggest chunk there. So again, I look at that and I say, well, if you're on the front end of a strategy like this, if you're on the front end of getting these things implemented, I could see where those C-suite executives are feeling like we're making improvement, like we're moving down this pathway, where where maybe it's not fully, out there yet, fully publicized. Maybe, as an example, if you're a leader of people, you're not making these strategies most of the time. You're not necessarily the one who's making these decisions, but the ability for you to help, people become educated on what are these things that we're doing for well-being, what are the new benefits, what are the things that you have as options for you. Those things are extremely important in moving people from no change to improved. And so I think that's kind of what I see in the perception gap, is there's the element of, to your point, the big picture of our senior leaders and executives kind of role modeling the pain if necessary, or role modeling, the things that we're doing for everyone. And then our local leaders really doing the best to make sure that the people are informed and educated and are cared for locally and are understanding how these things are being implemented to make sure that you have better well-being across the board.
Right. I think this also calls into mind the importance of what it means to be aligned with you and your direct leader. And so if you're thinking about, the questions to be able to ask your people and to have your people ask of you, sometimes the alignment between the two of you on something is more important than whatever the answer is, right? So if there's a problem, that's not necessarily the end of the world. Problems can be solved and problems happen all the time. Do you and your leader agree on what the problem is and how big a problem it is, right? Or do you agree that the work being done to solve it is the right work, even if it's not necessarily a problem that is solved already? The issues arise mostly when that lack of alignment is there. So if one person's like, so a perfect example here, in the Gallup's Strengths Finder that I did a long time ago, I was told that one of the kind of the negative elements of the fact that in my top 5 I have strategic and communication in my top 5, it makes me significantly more likely to be able to move past a negative interaction with somebody very quickly and get back to whatever the work is at hand, kind of let bygones be bygones, not dwell and not hold a grudge. But that also leads me to believe that other people are doing the exact same thing. So there have been times in my career, fortunately not many, where I felt like I was getting the cold shoulder from somebody and I didn't know why. And when I finally pulled them aside to say what's going on, they brought up an interaction that they had with me 6 months or a year or 2 years earlier. And it's like, oh my gosh, either I didn't even remember that, or B, I wish I had known that 6 months or a year or 2 years ago, so we could have rectified it then. I moved on from it. They didn't. So that lack of alignment, what did that cause in terms of fallout for our ability to get work done in the time between it happening and me thinking to myself, that person's giving me the cold shoulder. I don't know what's going on here. Having that alignment and being able to talk with your people daily or weekly or monthly or however often it is to kind of get a level check on not whether there are problems, but are you agreed upon what the problems are, if there are any? That's the first step to kind of moving through the issues, or at least making sure that you have your thumb on the pulse of them so that nothing blindsides you like I think it happens to a lot of people.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think from a local leadership standpoint, when you look at the kind of the care gap in this article, and it talks a little bit about, 95% of executives believe workers would say the C-suite cares about their well-being, and 50% of workers believe executive leadership cares about their well-being. But then if you look at the managers, you say 92% managers believe workers would say management cares about well-being, and then 68% workers believe. So there's a 18% increase from in this survey of workers, from executives, from workers to managers. But that makes sense because your local leaders are going to have way more of those interactions. Your local leaders are going to have way more of those conversations. Your local leaders are going to be able to have dialogue and conversation with their teams to show and to bring to life the care that they have, where the executives just will not simply have that much face time for the most part. Or if they do, it's usually in kind of large groups, or it's kind of mass media emails, that type of thing like that. So I think that speaks to that. One of the things that really kind of piqued my interest was around kind of this modeling gap. And what the data says is that 72% of the C-suite respondents said they always or often share information about their own well-being with their employees, but the workers said that they see a level of about 16% transparency from their leaders.
That's a huge gap right there.
A huge gap right there. And that's a big one. And so I think that there's a little bit that we could unpack there. But I think, kind of elements of not just self-awareness, but proactively considering how do you share without necessarily oversharing, but providing real examples of well-being, what's going on, and how things are going, I think is critical.
Right. So the first thing you said there about the 50% from executive leadership and 68% from workers, to me that just stems from the fact that it's really hard to believe that someone actually cares about your well-being if you've never met them, right? Like if they're 2,000 miles away in an office building and you've never interacted with them, to say, yes, this person cares about my well-being, that's a tough question to ask. They might care holistically about the well-being of their employees, but do they care about my well-being? I don't know. Like, so I get why that question, the answer to that question was higher when it comes to workers and the direct managers. To me, the bigger problem is the fact that that's only 68%. That 68% of workers believe managers care about their well-being. So a third of employees believe that their direct manager doesn't care about their well-being. And I think where that is a problem is that in a lot of organizations, you probably don't have a lot of control over what the benefits packages are and the offerings, the benefits offerings when it comes to well-being for your employees. You probably don't have a lot of control over what those things are. So how do you impact your employees' well-being without being able to have control over these things? Well, you do that with your actual relationship with them. And so if your employees don't believe you care about their well-being, if they're part of that 1/3 of employees who say that, what does that say about what you believe your role is as a leader when it comes to positively impacting their well-being, knowing that you don't, like if you believe that the only way to impact their well-being is if you have control over what the benefits packages are and the different offerings, if that's what your take is on it, then it's a losing battle already, because you likely don't have control over that unless you're one of, a dozen people in an organization. So what are you doing to actually positively impact your employees' well-being? I think it might become sometimes easier to do that if you just start with discarding this notion that you should have any control over what these offerings or packages are and just focusing on what you do have control over.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to this episode's 1-minute hack. But first, a few words from our sponsors.
All right, for this episode's 1-minute hack, here's what I want you to do. There are a lot of different gaps this article talks about, and we'll post a link to the article in the podcast description. So read through them. Specifically at the end, there are bullet points and pointers in the article around bridging these gaps between leaders and employees. And I think it's important to look at them through the lens of what you can actually do. And so you might not be able to read them specifically and go, yes, I can totally do that. You might look at them and think, I can't do that, but I will tell you, you can. So I'll give an example. The very first bullet point on what you can do as a leader to kind of bridge these gaps is it says, measure well-being and publicly report organizational well-being metrics. You can't improve what you don't measure. You might not have any control over what those metrics are, but whether or not you share them with your team is completely up to you. And so if you're given a report about well-being metrics or anything, and you are transparent with your team, even if it paints you personally in a negative light, that transparency will show that you are modeling what you were trying to say of, I want to make this a better thing, and I can't do that unless I first admit to where the problems are. The second bullet point says, make leaders more accountable by tying bonuses to achieving human sustainability goals. You might not have any control over what the bonus structure is, but what you do have control over is what you are publicly and acting out your priorities are when it comes to interviewing and promoting people. And so if you are promoting people who are doing these things well, you're telling your people that this is the type of result you're looking for. And that is virtually the same thing as saying you're tying bonuses to human sustainability goals. Well, you're tying career progression to it, which in some cases could even be more impactful than just a bonus. So there's a lot of ways to look at these bullet points to improve alignment and bridge these gaps that you do have control over, even if you're not a policymaker in your organization. So read through them and figure out how you can best impact the individual relationship between you and your people, and you'll do a lot of good.
Yeah, I like that hack. And that's a lot of what you can do as a leader is localize. There's always going to be big strategies, big visions, big things that the organization's asking you to do to bring to life, but to be able to actually bring it to life and have your people experience it requires you to figure out how do you localize it and how do you make these things, while sometimes feel like out of your control, a part of how you build culture amongst your teams, how you celebrate success, how you make decisions around career advancement, career progression. All of these things that you have as a local leader allow you to really enforce and be able to bring to life the cultural elements that you're looking to impact from an organization standpoint.
Right. It's no different than how policy is made at a government level. Obviously, a policy that attempts to do the same thing for everybody in a country is probably going to be less effective and more kind of, peanut butter across than a policy that is set for a smaller group of people in a smaller area, because those people likely have more in common than people spread out over a broader one. So if you're part of a C-suite and you're making policy, you have to do the best you can with the fact that you have people that vary across maybe a large geographic area, different stages of their career, different stages of their home life. Like, all these things can vary vastly across an organization if you're creating policy for the entire organization, but they probably vary less if you're looking at you as a leader and the people reporting directly to you on your team. And so how you impact these things for your people, you have much more control over this than you might think. And in some cases, you have more control over it than even the senior leaders of your organization.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you all next time.